Hello, and welcome to Class 4 of the AQS Let's Quilt series of classes. This class is going to be about foundation piecing. Do you know, I've read lots of comments on Facebook about people saying they really would like to learn how to foundation piece. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to make this pillow in the first two lessons, and in the second two lessons, we'll be making a tote bag with a foundation piece pocket on it. So let's first of all talk a little bit about why do you want to learn how to foundation piece. It's one of those techniques that everyone should have in their arsenal if you're going to do any designs like the one that we're going to do today that have these really sharp points. And it's real critical. Sometimes when you're piecing those in a traditional method, particularly if you're using the sewing machine, it's really hard to get those pieces to come out nice and sharp. So anytime that you have points, sometimes you might be doing a curved section of flying geese, would be another good application for it. But sometimes if you're just going to make one block and you can foundation piece it, maybe it's a log cabin block of some kind that you're doing for your guild. If you do it with foundation piecing, you know it's all going to come out exactly the same size. Before we talk about the foundation papers, I want to make sure that you go to quiltweek.com/letsquilt and scroll down to lesson 1, and you'll see a link that says downloadables. And there'll be a downloadable for each lesson that we're going to be doing in this class. And particularly, I want you to pay attention to page 4, because on page 4, I've given you just a little cheat sheet so that as you start doing the foundation piecing, it tells you the steps right in order. And all you're going to do is do it once, and then you're going to repeat it for each blade that we're going to put on this particular block. And so I want to show you what I did. I printed it out large so that I can have it right here close to where I'm working. So be sure to print out the handout. Okay, so then let's talk about papers. We have Carol Doak's foundation papers, and this is available from 9 Patch Fabrics, one of our sponsors. And this paper is sort of the weight of newsprint. So it's made 8.5 by 11, so you can print on it very easily. And it's very easy to sew on. All right, the next paper I want to show you, which is the paper that I have done foundation piecing on for years, and it's vellum. Now, a lot of times we think of vellum when you put a piece of vellum inside a wedding invitation or something. It just adds a real classy look to it. But I like it because it's transparent. So even when you're looking at the back side of the pattern, you can see the lines perfectly clear. All right. I made the pillow by just printing it out on plain copy paper. Now, I will tell you that I think most of the copy paper has more rag in it, cotton rag, and so it makes it a little bit harder to tear away. I can tell you that the vellum is a lot easier to tear away than using that. You also could use newsprint, and you can buy newsprint in 8.5 by 11 sheets. I ordered some, but it came 1/8 of an inch too long and too wide, which means to use it, I have to cut down every single piece. So if you're going to buy it, make sure that it is 8.5 by 11. That's an extra step you don't want to do, believe me. And you also can print on fabric. And this is a sheet of cotton lawn, LAWN, that's available from Electric Quilt. And it goes through your printer. And you can see that it's shiny on the back, so it's got kind of a plastic sheet on the back. Goes through the printer beautifully. It also prints really well. I use this particular fabric when I want to print photographs, for instance, because it's tightly woven and your ink will fill in those holes so it won't look like it's fabric. So sometimes when you want to use fabric to do it, Maybe you want to make a fabric postcard. I've learned out how to get 3 fabric postcards on one sheet of this. So the way that you can use fabric. Some people will take a piece of fabric and adhere it to freezer paper. I have trouble with that, and you sure don't want to get either the threads or the freezer paper caught in your printer, because then it's a half a day to try to remove it all. So those are the different papers that we can use. And we're going to take a short break from our sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to start to do some sewing on one of these blocks.
Tracy's Tables has all of your custom sewing table needs. Visit tracystables.com to see the complete line of unique tables, carts, and shelves. And all of Tracy's tables are made in the USA.
Okay, so now we're ready to get our pattern ready to do the stitching. And so I'm going to show you a few things. First of all, we need to measure the pattern to find out what size strips. You know, in the downloadables, I ask you to cut 2.5-inch strips, and I want to show you why. This is our sewing line right here, and so I need to measure off of that sewing line to determine how wide the strip needs to be. So I'm going to lay my ruler right on that line, and it's nearly 1.5 inches. Comes clear over to here down at this tip. So normally we would add 1/2 inch for 1/4 of an inch seam allowances on both sides, right? Well, this is one place you don't want to skimp on how you measure. So I add 1/2 inch. I add a 1/2 inch seam allowances, add a whole inch. So that 1.5 inches becomes 2.5 inch strips. Now, there are people that would measure from one end down to the other end of the sewing line, but I don't do that. You know, you do waste a little bit of fabric doing this technique, but I think you'll use less fabric if you don't cut strips and you just do it you don't cut pieces, you just do it in strips. So that's why, and as I start sewing, you'll see exactly why. Okay, so we have 2.5 inch strips. The next thing we need to do with our pattern is we need to score those stitching lines. Now, you can do that using several different tools. You can use a metal ruler, and I'll just fold one here to show you how I do that. But the metal ruler, and I have it upside down because you don't want any depth to it, but you still have to back it off just a fraction so that when you fold, and I'm going to use my nail to just crease that paper all the way down that edge, and now I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to actually score that. So that's one way you can do it. Okay, the other way you can do it is you can take just a piece of cardstock. This is just like a recipe card, and I can do it again. So I'm going to fold that one out, and I will tell you that it's a lot easier to pre-score these than it is to wait until you get fabric in here too. So again, I'm just going to turn it over the edge, use my nail to score, checking my score right there, and again, I'm just going to fold. All right, so that's 2 ways you can do it. Now, I told you that you really want the add a quarter ruler, and you'll see here I have 3 of them. This is mine, and I've had it for a long time, and you can see that it has some depth. I don't know, maybe 1/8 of an inch or a little more to it. So that's the old style. Here's the new style, and they've beveled that edge. Can you see the bevel on that edge? And so what that does is that gives me a tool that I can score my pattern with. So again, I'm going to line up the ruler right along that edge. Again, use my nail to score the paper. Fold it over. Now, I brought this one too. This is a 6-inch one. I recommend, if you don't have one, that you buy the 12-inch one, because even though these lines are 6 inches long, when you put them on the diagonal like they are, you can see, well, I guess this ruler is long enough, but you'll find the 12-inch one much more versatile. You have to have a pretty small block to use the 6-inch one. So we're not going to use that one, and I'm going to put that one away because it doesn't score. And so now I'm going to just continue scoring the rest of my pattern. Oh wow, I didn't score that one very good. It's kind of whopper-jawed here on the end. We're going to go back, and you do want to check that when you do them, because you want to make sure you're right on the line. There we go. You know, I've had several of you that have taken these classes tell me that they always like it when I mess up on something, because then I tell you how to fix it. Well, you know what? In quilting, there isn't very much we can't fix. And believe me, I do make mistakes. Sometimes we've actually had to reshoot a section because I messed it up totally. Okay, so now I have my pattern all scored, and I'm just going to kind of straighten it out because I'm going to have to sew on all those printed lines. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about our fabric. I ask you to cut 4 values of one color and 4 values of a second color. There are 8 different blades on this block, and so I've laid them out in the order that I'm going to sew it. So I have the darkest pink, the next, and then the lightest. I've gone the other direction with the other fabric and put the darkest, number 2, number 3, and number 4. Now, once you have those all laid out, and I will tell you that sometimes if I'm working on a project that has a lot of different fabrics in it, I will take a straight back chair and put it right here and lay my fabric over the back of that chair. Because the one thing that you want to do is that every time you pick up a piece of fabric and sew it, you want to make sure that you put it back in order so that it's in the same order the next time you need it for the next block. Okay, so I've got a few other tools here that I need right close at hand. I need my add a quarter ruler. I need a rotary cutter. And I'm using, this is the 18mm rotary cutter. You could use a 45mm cutter, but this one is really handy to have right here next to your sewing machine. And then I have 3 different sew line tools. And again, these are provided by 9 Patch Fabrics. This is a glue pen, and it has the blue glue, okay? And that's made for fabric. This is the sew line 3 color, and sometimes you're going to be drawing lines on things, and so sometimes you need white, sometimes you need black, and so the third one is just a stylus-like end on the end of it. And this is a mechanical pencil for fabric, and this can be taken out with water. So those are the 3 different tools that we have there. Now, you do a lot of pressing in this technique, and I find that instead of using the iron right here next to me because it's hot and it will heat up your sewing room, I find that a wallpaper roller, and this is just a wooden one, wallpaper roller from my wallpaper kit, but then I found this one online, and it's made out of acrylic, and it's hard. And I like that one because it's a little bit wider. It also rolls really well. So this is the one I'm going to use, and so I need to have that right here next to my rotary cutter, so I need those tools. And the next thing I need are my strips. So I'm going to begin sewing. And first of all, I want to tell you that I did cut out my template an extra 1/4 of an inch beyond the seam line that will be out here at the edge of the block. We'll trim that when it's all done, but if you just cut this a little bit extra, you're not going to cut your pieces too short. Ever. You're not going to cut them too short because you're going to be seeing the edge of that paper and know that you need to trim it off at the edge of the paper, and you won't have to go back and try to do a fix-it. Okay, so let's start with piece number 1. And that's the dark red. Now, as you cut your strips, I bought fat quarters in the greens and 1/2 yards in the pinks. And if you're going to use 2 colorways like I've done on this one, you just need 1 strip will be enough to do all 4 blocks for the pillow if it's 40 inches wide. And you need 2 strips if you're using a fat quarter. Okay? All right. When I come back from this commercial from our sponsors, we're going to sit down and we're going to sew the very first 2 pieces on. We'll be back in a second.
The secret to every great project is great lighting. You can have beautiful fabric, the best threads, but if you can't see what you are sewing, we all know what will happen. Vivolux lights and lasers are the only lights made by quilters for quilters. Look for Vivolux lights and lasers at your favorite independent sewing and quilt shop or online. 9 Patch Fabrics has a wide variety of fabric, patterns, and notions. We offer quilt store quality fabric from manufacturers such as Moda, Robert Kaufman, Island Boutique, and more. 9 Patch Fabrics also features a variety of notions, including creative grids, rulers, sew line marking tools, and more. Visit 9 Patch Fabrics at 9patchfabrics.com.
Okay, now we're ready to start sewing. Now, if you happen to have chosen some fabrics that are printed on one side and then it might be white looking or a different color on the back side, so that you have a right side up. I'm using hand-dyed fabric, so it doesn't really make much difference. But the very first piece, and it's only the very first piece, you will put on the back of your template, and I'm going to lay this out here because you can see that because I'm using the vellum on this particular block, I can actually see right where the edge of that lays. Okay? All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take 1 pin and I'm going to pin this in place. And now this would be with the wrong side of the fabric facing up, okay? The right side would be over here. All right, so now the next thing we need to do is add piece number 2. So I'm going to go to slot number 2, and that's this color of green. Now you do want to watch because you'll have selvages on your fabric. Now I've already cut this one, but if you have a selvage on the end of your piece of fabric, you need to make sure that you trim that off. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do, and I want you to watch how I do this because here's my folded line, and I'm going to align the second piece. Now I take it and put it between my fingernails and allow that much extra at the end of the piece. Right here is the start, and so you can see with my fingers right there, if you do that, you're not ever going to get this cut too short. All right, so now I'm going to lay my first piece down on the second piece, align those edges. Now I'm going to flip the pattern over, and if you put that little cheat sheet right here next to you, you're going to say, fold the pattern over. All right, so we're going to do that. I'm just going to take this pin out now and I'm going to pin it through both pieces. 1 pin is all I use through this whole process. Okay, so now you're going to pick it up, and I've got both pieces of fabric, And now when I take it to the sewing machine, I always do that double check so that before you start sewing, you can make sure that both pieces are right where you need them. Need to line my fabric just a little bit here. Those two pieces of fabric. I can see my seam allowance out here on the edge. Now, to set up on your sewing machine, I'm using a 50 weight thread. I have my stitch length at 2.5. If you were using one of those papers that's harder to tear off, you might want to shorten it to 2.0. Okay, so on my machine, I have it at 2.5. Okay, the foot on your sewing machine, I'm using the 97D 1/4 inch foot, and whatever you do, you want to make sure that you don't have a bar that goes all the way across. It needs to be so that you can see right where these lines are. So if I put my finger right here, I can see a shadow from that foot. Okay, so now I'm going to use the flywheel, and I'm going to turn that toward me. You don't ever want to turn it the other way. You want to turn it toward yourself. And I'm going to put it down so that I'm one stitch before the line and sew right on that line. Now you can see I put my pin in here where the head's in the way, so you want to make sure you don't do that. You want to try to put it in so you get it out of your way and you can just continue sewing. So now I'm going to come to the end. I'm going to sew one stitch beyond, and then I'm going to use the thread cutter. Okay, so now you might be tempted to want to trim this off right now. We're not going to do that yet because, you know, these aren't set on here straight. We're sewing at an angle. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open it up and we're going to press it. And you'll just be amazed. You won't ever get those little wrinkles where your stitching line is if you just press it like that. All right, now I'm going to take one pin and I'm going to hold this pink one out of the way. And now, here's the edge of our pattern, right here. You see the edge of the pattern? You want to have a pair of shears handy because we want to cut that off so that it's right at the edge of the pattern. All right, so now this won't be long enough for another piece, so I'm going to lay that away, but I'm going to lay piece number 1 back in its position. And we've sewn piece number 1 and piece number 2, so I'm ready for piece number 3. Okay, so one of the things we have to do next is we need to trim off this excess fabric. And we creased our line, so I can turn this over and crease it down. And if you find one that it isn't exactly creased right, you need to just fix it before you start sewing. The very end of this one is not creased exactly right. There we go. All right, now, while you have this in your hand, we're going to do the trimming. And this has a lip that will fit right along the edge of our pattern. Now I can pick up my rotary cutter. Now, if you're real frugal and want to save these scraps, then, stick them in a pile and save them. For this particular purpose, I'm not going to save those scraps. All right, so now, once we've done that, we're ready to add another piece on right there. So this is, check your pattern, this is piece number 3. So piece number 3 is another pink. And I take these big long strips like this one that was cut from yardage and cut those in half just because it is easier to work with just a half of a strip. Okay, so again, I'm ready to align, and I'm going to lay the strip out here. I've got my fingernail right here. I'm going to put that piece of fabric in between my two fingernails. We're going to lay it out. We're going to flip the pattern over. We're going to put one pin to hold those two strips. And now I'm ready to pick it up and take it to the machine. And you know what? It never hurts to take your pattern and go like this and make sure everything is all lined up before you start that sewing. Okay, so now we're going to put our needle down. One stitch. And now we're going to sew on the line. Cut the thread. You either can fold this out and trim this off, but I find it's real convenient to just trim it off at the same length that we had that one, and I'm going to cut right straight across my strip of fabric. Okay, so now we're ready, we're done with that color. We'll put it back in order. We'll pull out our pin. We're going to open it up and press. All right, now we're ready to turn it over. And I will tell you, only because I did this on one of the blocks that I was sewing, and that was I missed a line and had to tear a piece off. So I will just tell you to get in a habit of feeling where your last stitching was. And on mine, it's this one right here, and here's my next line, to make sure when you fold this back that you're folding it in the right place. So we're going to take our add a quarter, line it up on the edge, trim. And this is a good time, if you don't have a wastebasket that's real close and handy, I've just pinned a plastic bag right here to the edge of the sewing cabinet. Okay, now we're ready to add the next piece. The next piece will be piece number 4. Again, I've put that fabric between my finger and my nail so that I have just that extra little cushion. I've lined it up. I folded out the pattern. I put one pin in so it's out of my way. And all that does is while you're moving this fabric so that you can move it without having to hold everything at the top and the bottom. So, okay, so I've picked it up, ready to bring it to the machine. All right, so I'm going to double check. Here's my last stitching line to make sure I'm on the right line. Okay, so now we've sewn all 8 pieces to our block. Okay, let's take just a short word from our sponsors, and when we come back, we'll get this trimmed up and we're going to play with our blocks to see how we want to lay them out. We want to give this a good pressing before we do the trimming, so that's what we'll do next. And the one thing you just want to remember when you're pressing, let the heat of the iron do the work. We don't have to work at this really, really hard. We just need to let the heat do the work. Okay, so now I'm going to lay it upside down, and I just want to make sure that I'm going to cut outside the stitching lines. So this will be the line we stitch the blocks together on. So I want to make sure that I have 1/4 of an inch extending beyond the edge of the block. Okay, so now we're ready to lay our block out. And you either can choose to put, in my case, the dark pink, dark rose color in the center, or if you want to go and put the green in the center. So either way, if you do the green in the center, then I probably would put a green border on it. But I'm going to sew mine together with the pink, and I'll tell you why, and that is I didn't have enough of the green. I was going to do one way and one the other, but I didn't have enough of the green fabric to give me a border, and I had plenty of the pink fabrics because I had 1/2 yard cuts. And so I'm going to make it just like the pillow I showed you at the beginning of the program. If you've taken classes with me before, you probably know how I use a positioning pin to be able to put pieces together, particularly where you want them to match. So I'm going to take 2 blocks and put them together. Now if I cut them accurately, you would think that if I put a pin through here on this corner, that it would be not quite. So I'm going to pick up this other corner, and I'm just going to move that ever so slightly so that I can get the pin right in the corner. All right, so that's my positioning pin. Now, if you were to just take that pin and twist it backwards and pin it, I don't know if you can see, but when I do that and I twist, it's going to move that back fabric just ever so slightly, and now it's not going to match up. But if I leave this pin sticking in here and take a second pin and pin it right next to it with just a tiny bite as I can, now that positioning pin has kept those 2 fabrics in position for me. So I'm going to do the same thing with the other corner. Let's see how lucky I can be here. I will tell you that often it is not right in the corner. Nope, again I'm off just ever so slightly. So I'm going to take the pin and pull it out, and now I'm going to slide. If you're lucky, you can find one of the thread holes that your stitching thread went through. Okay, so I've got the positioning pin in there again, and now I'll take my second pin and just take as small a bite as you can. You're going through lots of layers right there. All right, now the one place that you often are able to make this work when you put it through is when you do the one in the center of the edge. Ha ha! See, I told you. If you get the ends lined up, usually the center one is real easy to do. Remember to take your positioning pins out. And now I'm ready to take this to the sewing machine and sew. And you'll remember I never sew over pins, so I pull those out as I go. Okay, so I have 2 of them sewn together. And now I will do exactly the same thing with the other 2. Worked again. Okay, so now I want to show you one of the things that I'm doing here. You notice I haven't torn the paper off yet. I always sew the block all the way together before I do that, but I also am alternating these 2 seam allowances. So the one on that half goes one way, and the one on this half goes the other way. Okay, so now I'm ready to sew my 2 halves together. You can see that you have seam lines going against a solid, seam lines going against the solid. So the only place that we have to match is right here in the center. All right, now before I go on, I didn't do what I told you I was going to do, and that is pink, pink. I've got both these seam allowances going the same direction. So let's reset one of these. You know, it's real easy to fix things like that if you do it before you start sewing. All right, pink and pink. Let's try this again. And how did I notice that? I noticed it because I had a lot of bulk all in one place, and it should have been flattened out like this is, like we were nesting our seams. I think that'd be real easy to just pop that right in that corner, but you know, it isn't always quite that easy. Okay, so, oh gosh, we got that perfect in the middle. So, the next step in making this pillow is to tear the paper off. And let me show you how to do that, because in the next lesson we'll be adding our borders and we will be finishing up the whole pillow. So I take, and again, if you just score that paper, all right, so now you should be able to pick the next one loose. And again, I'm going to bend it over to help score that paper, and so you can see how clean that paper tears right out of there. And now this is the vellum that I used on this particular foundation piecing. So for next week's lesson, I want you to tear the paper off. Make sure you have the other parts for your pillow. If you want to do any quilting, and all the quilting I did was vertical and horizontal, just to hold the whole fabric together. And anytime you put something like this, is a piece of fleece that I used on mine, cut the 2 pieces for your back of the pillow and cut the strips that you need for your borders. That's what we'll do next time. But before we go, I want to make sure that you all know about the wonderful prizes that our sponsors are giving away. And to find the registration button for that, go to quiltweek.com/letsquilt. And if you're not yet an AQS member, go to americanquilter.com and join AQS today. We'll see you next time when we'll finish up our pillow.